Thank you very much, dear Elizabeth, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak from a podium that I don't usually get to speak from. But most importantly, I have to say it's always a great pleasure to interact with the membership of the UN Association of the US and all of you others who are committed to supporting the ideals of the United Nations, the ideal we strive to achieve every day in our work here, and I know that you strive to achieve every day in your work or wherever you are in the US. To say that we are living in challenging times would be a slight understatement. I think Elizabeth talking about the perma-crises really encapsulates the time that we are living in right now. Just a few days ago, from this very podium, our Secretary-General Antonio Guterres laid out his vision of the world for 2024. He noted that the one thing that is dramatically missing from our lives in all its aspects is peace. Peace in all its dimensions, peace between nations, peace between peoples, peace within societies, and I would say almost most importantly, peace with nature. Peace is the cornerstone of our work and our hopes, and it should be the cornerstone of all our collective efforts. And at times like this, when the going gets tough, we look to the future perhaps with a bit of apprehension that we have to redouble our efforts to live up to the ideals of the Charter of the United Nations, the ideals of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the concrete goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. That effort, that journey, we can only take together. That's why I'm so glad to be able to spend a bit of time with you this morning, because you're such an important part of the work that we do at the United Nations. You're such an important partner for us here at the United Nations. And I think ours is a unique partnership that creates a network of other important partnerships with the UN, with experts, with advocates, and with communities of all kinds that are representative of the world that we live in. And I can't thank enough the UN Foundation, the UN Association for the US, and its chapters, and of course its members, for all the groundwork that you do to ensure that the relationship between the United Nations and the people of the United States remains strong. But let's be honest, it's not a very easy time to be a supporter of this United Nations. The decisions, the things that we sometimes say and the decisions that are taken by member states in this very hall can make it very challenging for all of us. The efforts that you make here at the local level throughout the US is truly critical to the work that we do at the global level. You're clearly the link that brings us closer to the first words of the United Nations Charter, we the peoples. To that end, I think it would be much more productive for me, and I hope for you, if we spend most of the time for me to answer your questions, to respond to your observations and perhaps even your criticisms, or maybe even a few words of praise. Because I think to be able to defend the United Nations, you need the right tools. And the most important tool is to be able to explain this organization in all its complexities. Because understanding the UN is really the first step for a constructive engagement. We're all open to criticism, but all that we ask is at least that the criticism be informed criticism or informed observations. So thank you for doing everything that you do to defend our shared ideals, to build a better world, and I look forward to engaging with you. So maybe if I could grab a mic and I will start. I put on my professorial outfit. So.
We'll see Maria and Troy, if you would put up your hands and wave. We've got two guests helping us.
Troy, I think we have a question over here.
Peace TV reporters have been active at the UN headquarters since 2010, the age of former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. They are often invited to gather pictures and news about high-level meetings and events at the UN headquarters. We usually report live on the scene the events of dozens of countries, including the US, France, the UK, Israel, Germany, Russia, Egypt, Kuwait, Bulgaria, Ukraine, and Morocco, and the EU at the UN headquarters and their residences in New York. Our news reports have, in part, kept the international community up to date with the work of different governments so that people everywhere will know the great efforts and contributions of the UN to world peace, international affairs, and multilateralism.
Yep.
Please wait for the microphone
Yeah.
before you begin to speak. Thank you.
Maybe we can tee it up on the other side as well, just for time.
Okay.
Thanks so much for coming to speak with us. The ambassador in her video presentation talked about this two-state solution for the Middle East, for Gaza and Israel. And so has the Secretary General, and so have you in the press conferences, which I've enjoyed seeing. I wonder if you could specify more precisely what you imagine that two-state solution to be, or what details, or how to get there. And secondly, have you considered bifocals?
Bifocals. I'm never prepared. The only thing I would ask you, if you could give me your name. So just Troy. Oh, if we just get back to the microphone. It's always helpful.
Sorry, Steve Watrous from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, president of the local chapter.
Great, thank you. The two-state solution remains the goal, right? Israel and Palestine, two states living side by side in peace and security. Let's be honest, if we knew exactly how we were going to get there in every detail, I would hope we would have been there, right? There are a number of, a whole host of issues that we would call final status issues, whether it's the status of Jerusalem, the issue of the right of return, compensation, security arrangements, all of these things have to be worked out. But what we do know is that the only way they can be worked out is through direct dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. No solution can be imposed. I think that's been tried and not been successful. We are unfortunately at a time where I think potential dialogue between the two is hard to imagine in this very moment, and that's why the Secretary General keeps advocating for the two-state solution, but also advocates for the immediate, for a humanitarian ceasefire, for the immediate release of all, and unconditional release of all the hostages that are being held. Right here in the, yeah.
Hello, my name is Nathan Goldberg from Westchester, New York. So I constantly hear about all these wonderful goals we have as the United Nations, like to solve peace with the environment, peace among peoples, among nations, and it just seems so scary when we have all these problems and not like some direct path to follow to solve them. So as someone who's coming up in this world, what's actions you would suggest for me and my peers to take to help create a world where we don't have these issues, or at least they're minimized? Thank you.
I think regardless of where you stand on the age scale, I think it does seem daunting, right? It seems daunting for me, and it seems daunting for you. The path is by taking a first step, right? And seeing how you and what impact you can have in your own community, right? Everything doesn't have to be at the global level. You need to start in your own community. You need to start in your own, in a sense, in your own neighborhood. You also have to realize that you have a lot of power in your ability to vote, in how you consume, how you spend your money, what you study. So it's all inside of you in a way, but I think the most important thing is not to be daunted and not thinking that we can solve all of these problems all at once. We all have to take first steps and just stay engaged, and stay true to the ideals I think that we all share, which are the ones in the Charter and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Hey, Steph, I've got a call right here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Paulette Austin from UNA New York. I think the executive director said that henceforth any member of any of the P5s who cast a veto, they have to explain, the reasons behind it to the General Assembly. Is this in lieu of the restructuring of the Security Council?
I think it's a chipping away at reform of the Security Council, right? And it's, within our little UN world, it's a monumental step. Now, of course, seen from the outside, it's sort of inside baseball, though we don't talk too much about baseball in these halls. It's about accountability of action, right? It's about ensuring that those who have the veto power, who have the right to exercise the veto power, a very, very small group of countries, right? 5 out of 193, at least have to explain themselves publicly in front of the global audience, in front of the whole membership, which is reflected here. So I think it is a very, very important first step, but it doesn't address the core issue of the full reform of the Security Council and who gets to sit in the permanent chairs, who gets to use the right of veto, and when.
We have one over here.
Yeah, my name is Stella Mbakwa. I'm from Cameroon. I know United Nations to be a representation of the whole world, to bring peace where there is no peace. I'm very surprised that in plenaries like this, I've never heard about Cameroon, where the government is killing its people. More than 5 years ago, people are dying. I mean, roasting people, roasting the whole villages and so on. I've never heard about Cameroon. I don't think United Nations is discriminating. I've never heard about Cameroon. All I hear is Russia, Ukraine, and so on and so forth. What about Cameroon? What about all African countries who are at war? Is United Nations absent? Please, we need you to come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think two points. One, to speak specifically about Cameroon, it is an issue that often comes up in our briefing room, in our speeches. And I would say the Secretary General has been very clear about expressing his concern about the human rights violations that we're seeing, in the violence that we're seeing in the northwest and in the southwest of the country. We have a very good team in Cameroon who is doing what it can to support the people of Cameroon. But I think your broad, if I can use your intervention to make a broader point, is that and I think Ambassador Thomas Greenfield referred to that, there are way too many underreported crises, right? The global media, kind of like ourselves, has the capacity to focus on 2 or 3 issues at a time. But we all know there are very, very important issues, important violations of human rights and suffering that is going on all over the world. And I'm often asked, like, what is the worst crisis in the world? And my answer is always, it depends where you sit, right? When your rights are being trampled, when your rights are not being respected, that is the worst crisis in the world. So I think it is important that we shine a light on crises that we see everywhere around the world.
Here.
Thank you. My name is Nyantil Chambang. I'm a South Sudanese survivor, and I have 2 questions for you. South Sudanese been in the face of crisis for as long as I live, and I was a survivor. I fled to this country. But again, like my sister just said, across, South Sudanese are being forgotten in front of the world, the entire world. So my question is that what is being decided for these unrepresentative countries who are not maybe small? South Sudanese, maybe many of you don't know, is one of the youngest countries in the world, and has been a crisis since then. How is the being decided for what is being done for these crises for many refugees have fled? And secondly, how is the funding being decided? Because as of right now in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, 6 months, many refugees has not been able to get their UN ration. And there was funding distributed on that. I'm just curious to how is the fund being decided and how is the crisis being represented in front of the people. I represent an organization, Thornmet African Peace Foundations, which is right now is trying to help refugees. So please help me further elaborate.
Thank you. Sure, thank you. Let me take all the points you've made in reverse. The funding point is a very important point that everyone needs to know. The budget of the UN for the Secretariat is done on assessed contributions, using a formula involving GDP and population, and it's set. But that does not cover at all our humanitarian work. All of the humanitarian work of UNICEF, of the UN Refugee Agency, of the World Food Program is voluntarily funded. Every year we put out what we call humanitarian appeals for countries in need. And I can tell you, because I speak about these things every day, the vast majority of these appeals are funded at 20 or 30%. And in the grand scheme of things, we're not talking about a lot of money. But every year, throughout the year, the UN has to go and literally shake the tree to get money to fund our humanitarian appeals. And when there isn't enough money, the results are dramatic. World Food Program, if they don't have enough money for their programs in South Sudan or in Syria or in Yemen, they have to cut the food rations. And there is so much money in this world, but it's just not going to the right places. It's not going to fund the most immediate humanitarian needs that we have in this world. So I think it's very important for everyone to understand that the humanitarian work of the UN is voluntarily funded by member states, and we need help, and we need greater effort to help to push member states to fund these humanitarian appeals more. South Sudan is one of the countries around the world where there is a UN peacekeeping presence, where peacekeepers are trying to help humanitarians, are trying to help communities, are trying to rebuild communities. But South Sudan, as you mentioned, is one of the world's youngest countries. It was born out of great fanfare, but very soon forgotten, very quickly out of the headlines, while political crisis after political crisis continued. And it is one of these countries that is suffering from civil strife, where the Secretary-General has been very clear, where political leaders are putting their own personal gain above the needs and the aspirations of their people. One last thing about South Sudan that I will say. As you know, in this country, there's a lot of talk about migration and borders. South Sudan, one of the poorest countries in the world, has actually opened its own borders for refugees fleeing from Sudan. And it symbolizes the fact that it is often the most vulnerable and least resource countries that do the most for their fellow human beings. I'm in your hands for time, so I could be here for hours, so you tell me. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Sharukil Barsiki. I'm Egyptian American, and I'm really glad to be here in this General Assembly Hall. My question is, the ICJ ordered Israel to take steps to prevent any acts of genocide against the Palestinians, and yet Israel hasn't complied. So as the spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, how would you respond to that? Thank you.
The response is very clear, that the International Court of Justice, one of the major organs of the United Nations, is fully independent from the Secretary General. He has no say or authority over the court. The judges are elected through a process between the General Assembly and the Security Council. That being said, the International Court of Justice is sort of one of the backbones of the international legal system. And for the Secretary General, it's very clear, in whatever case, decisions made by judges of the International Court of Justice need to be respected. Okay, I think I'm told to wrap it up. I want to thank you all, and I have to, as Rachel knows, I'm very easy to invite. I'm always happy to travel to anywhere in the US, so I hope to see you in your local chapters. Thank you.